Hello and welcome to yet another session. Today we are looking at this play, A Raisin in the Sun, and we begin by looking at this essay, 1988 essay, which is revisiting the play after about 3 decades after 1959 when the play was, after the play premiered in Broadway. And we realize that another 3 more decades have passed since the publication of this essay, and many of the observations continue to remain true. So I find this essay in that sense launching into a discussion which will also address the universal themes which are part of this play. So even before we get into a close reading mode by engaging with the play, this essay I hope will set the tone, will set the stage for the kind of discussion, the kind of themes that we would like to foreground and accentuate as part of this course. So the essay, this is a 1988 essay. It begins by offering a tribute to this play, Raisin in the Sun, which opened on Broadway in 1959, and it is also, paying a lovely tribute to Lorraine Hansberry, who actually tragically had died at the age of 34. And critic, the writer here, the author here, is also positioning this play in terms of its historical reception, in terms of its acceptance as performance, and trying to showcase how this continues to be relevant, how these discussions continue to be, how this play continues to generate a lot of, socially committed discussions. So there are certain qualities, certain personal qualities of the playwright that the critic is noting over here. What has inspired them is not only the quality of her art, but also her courage and commitment. So this play essentially is seen as a play about social problems, because look at the acknowledgement over here. She was not afraid to write a play about social problems because she understood that there are no plays which are not social and no plays that do not have a thesis. So there's a certain meta quality about this play as it addresses the social issues in a very, very direct way, but also in a slightly unconventional way, as we would begin to see. So the question of a black family and moving into a white neighborhood is at the heart of this play, but at the same time we realize that it is not done in a way that usually race questions were beginning to be addressed, particularly in the 1950s. So given the time of the setting of the play, and given that this was performed in the late 50s and early 60s, the matter-of-fact tone about this play needs to be much appreciated. So in the eyes of some critics, as this essay also points out, it was largely seen as a protest play or a social drama about a black family's struggle to buy a house in white neighborhood. So it was also seen as, the unhappy crossbreed of, as the critic over here is also quoting, Charles Washington is also quoting another work which says, there were a lot of critics who thought that this is just an unhappy crossbreed of social protest and reassuring resolution. But we, as we go deeper into the play, we understand that, it is not essentially that, but it is perhaps, something very, very cleverly written about this piece, which cannot be dismissed as a social opera in some sense. This article now also focuses on how perhaps Hansberry had positioned this work as and when she was creating the work, as and when she was putting it out for production and performance. For Hansberry, there was never a conflict between the play's specific social value and its universal literary value, because the latter was inextricably bound and grew logically out of the former. So this is one of those very rare works of art where the social commitment and the universal literary value are perfectly in sync with each other. So as I know, according to her, in her own words, I believe that one of the most sound ideas in dramatic writing is that in order to create the universal, you must pay very great attention to the specific. Universality, I think, emerges from the truthful identity of what is. So here we find an attempt to define what art is. So here we find that there is an attempt to define what art is, to define what is universal, to define how the ideas in dramatic writing can also have lasting social relevance to different communities across the globe in some sense. This is out of is not confined to a specific time, it's not confined to a specific geographical location, and we also find that it is not just about race either. It could be any kind of discrimination, any kind of social stratification, which would perhaps cast a shadow on the way people interact with each other, how communities are supposed to work. Yeah. So this is Hansberry also observed, we'll just take a look at this excerpt. There are no waving flags and marching songs at the barricades as Walter marches out with his little battalion. It is not because the battle lacks nobility. On the contrary, he has picked up in his way, still imperfect and wobbly in his small view of human destiny, what I believe Arthur Miller once called the golden thread of history. He becomes, in spite of those who are too intrigued with despair and hatred of man to see it, King Oedipus refusing to tear out his eyes, but attacking the oracle instead. He is that last Jewish patriot manning his rifle in the burning ghetto at Warsaw. He is that young girl who swam into sharks to save a friend a few weeks ago. He is Anne Frank, still believing in people. He is the 9 small heroes of Little Rock. He is Michelangelo creating David, and Beethoven bursting forth with the 9th Symphony. He's all those things because he has finally reached out in his tiny moment and caught that sweet essence of which is human dignity. And it shines like the old star-touched dream that is in his eyes. Yeah. So this is very interesting, the way she is positioning social protest. Yeah. It could be in Beethoven's symphony. It could also be in, the way Anne Frank saved herself and her family. It could also be seen in a burning ghetto in Warsaw. So what we find over here is that the idea of social protest is being treated in a very different way altogether. So here, as we continue to read, the dignity of Walter's character is present long before the end of the play when he marches out with his little battalion. However, the fact that Walter's dignity is somewhat obscured from view has led many readers, critics and viewing audiences to misunderstand him and his true intentions. So he's also quoting Douglas Turner Watt, that it's not Walter Lee's action at the end of the play as meaningful as it is to his development and inspiring to the audience, but his central presence and thrust throughout the play that should be emphasized. So it's more about the process over here than what one gets out of it. So in fact, if we take a close look at all the plays that we have read during this course, we would find that it's never about how it ends. It's never about what happens at the climax. Yeah, because most of the times it is some mega event has already happened, death has already happened, the failure has already happened. It's all about the individual trying to negotiate his or her way through that process. So this process that it's a very succinctly put over here, the presence and thrust throughout the play. So the action is something which keeps happening throughout the play. There is a process, there is an evolution which happens, and in that process we find that the society that the play is part of, where the characters are set in, that also becomes an object of critique, that also becomes something that gets reevaluated, that also becomes something that we realize has to undergo a radical change in order to accommodate the many changing belief systems, the many changing ideologies. So the overpowering personality of Lena Younger, particularly her moral rectitude and selfless nature, tends to overshadow Walter, and this accounts in part for the tendency of many readers and audiences to focus their attention almost entirely on her. Unfortunately, this violates the unequal balance of proportionate share of the spotlight which each deserves and which the structure of the play calls for. Yeah, this is again, this is also drawing attention to the dramatic and theatrical arrangement when a play is getting performed. Unlike the other genres, this is, when the play is getting performed, we know that there's a way in which all characters occupy the stage space, and that itself, it's a very in some sense, a very egalitarian presentation of the characters, where we find that, just like screen time, the stage presence is something through which we can evaluate the kind of importance that is being given to each of these characters. So I hope, you have already taken a look at the play and you're able to relate with these characters who are getting mentioned over here. So there's also some bits, some extra bits outside of the text which is being shared over here. Some months subsequent to the play's opening, Hansberry regarded the lack of a central character as a flaw in reason. Yeah, I'm not certain. So it says that in creating Walter Lee, Lorraine was even fully cognizant of the extent of her accomplishment. Indeed, I think a close reading of the play reveals her ambiguity. Yeah. So it is about, who is the central character over here. If you read through the play, that is something which will keep oscillating in terms of whether it is Walter or it is, with the youngers, who is the central character and whose story essentially becomes, takes the central piece over here. So it is also, it says how, how we frame literary judgments is also something which gets foregrounded over here. Our literary judgments to a large extent are determined by our own moral standards, by our adherence to the rules society demands appropriate. Yeah? So when we are looking at a piece of art, when we are looking at any genre, fiction, drama, poetry, yeah, the way we are looking at that a piece of work as a literary piece, as an aesthetic piece, it is very heavily overshadowed by the kind of rules by which we live, by the kind of moral compasses that we use to judge life in general. So generally these standards differ according to the sex of the individual. A good man, for instance, is strong, aggressive, masculine, whereas a good woman is sweet, gentle, feminine. It is a grievous error to assess Walter's character by a set of moral standards somewhat more applicable to his mother, whose actions rarely receive censure, even though they are far less than ideal. Again, if you look at the the kind of place that we have looked at so far as a body of American writing, American theatre, we find that the way each of these characters are positioned are like they are set against the larger society, and the way the audience are expected to treat them, they expected to respond to them, expected to evaluate and judge them. That also has a very large bearing on. It has a very large bearing on how our the morally as readers, as critics, we have been conditioned as well. So yeah, it further says, to fail to see this complexity here. So what is this complexity? He just gives this excerpt. Lorraine's real triumph is a depiction of Walter Lee as a complex, autonomous character who thinks and acts not as an author's marionette, but as a harbinger of all the qualities of character that would soon explode into American reality and consciousness. So regardless of the aspects of race and gender which are discussed over here, we find that this play is also essentially a critique of how American society functions. Yeah? It's about American reality and consciousness. It's about the many ideals which are soon becoming ways of life over there. So to fail to see this complexity is to fail to see the essence of the play, yeah? And hence its aesthetic value. For as Ward also observes, Walter is both structurally and thematically the play's dramatic focal point. It is Walter Lee, the bearer of aims and goals that have been conditioned by the prevailing values of the society, who is dramatically most representative. So here too, irrespective of the race angle, irrespective of the conditioning in terms of race and gender, we find that the Walter Lee becomes a central character who's conditioned by the modern American society, which is also driven by the notion of the American dream. It is Walter Lee who emerges as the most unique creation for his time. It is his behavior throughout the play which gives the play a prophetic significance. So we also find that the way most of these American plays have been conceived, it becomes almost impossible not to see a character either in alignment or in terms of his or her departure from these large, the larger than life iconic positioning of the notion of the American dream. If one is able to discern this prophetic significance, even though Lena overshadows Walter, the lack of a central character is of little consequence. In fact, the dual protagonists and the conflict centered on their differing ways of looking at the world are what give the play a dramatic tension as well as intellectual and emotional appeal. Yeah? So there are multiple things coming together over here while we are trying to judge the play. Yeah? So So now, he comes to the central point over here. In addition, this duality provides a structure that points to the primary meaning of the play, the tragedy of Walter's reach for the American dream. Yeah? So here, we begin to see this play in a different light altogether. So if you look at, if you closely examine the other plays that we have read through, there is always a character who is trying to reach for the American dream, and there are different forms of tragedies which befall them. Yeah, not because the American dream has been conceived fundamentally in a faulty way, because the means to reach it, there have been certain templates which were laid out, and if it is about success, if it's about prosperity, there are certain ways in which success and prosperity were always already defined, which by default meant that a few will succeed and a few will also fail. So the tragedy over here happens when one central character or one family is trying to reach for that play, perhaps not using the usual templates, not using the usual tools. So it's not essentially a failure, but it is a tragedy. So whatever, we had been looking at so far, whether we are looking at, Willy Loman or Tom and Glass Menagerie, they're not essentially failures. They are in some sense, tragic heroes as well. They have been doing things perhaps not in the way that is required to meet the goals which have been already set over there. So it's in some sense a tragedy of life, a tragedy of individual, a tragedy of sometimes a tragedy which befalls the entire family itself. And we also find that we saw this in Arthur Miller's plays as well. The individual tragedy, the national tragedy, what befalls a family, it's all intertwined as well, which is why this critique of the American dream becomes a very central theme for most of these plays, because only once you begin to critique that, you begin to, there's a possibility of, opening up the layers and, to examine what actually went wrong or what did not really work. So the intent of this essay is to restore a proper balance between Lena and Walter by focusing on him and his mode of thinking, as well as on the Afro-American and Afro-American values which formed his character. Yeah. So while this essay is largely talking about also striking a balance between these characters of Lena and Walter, what I am also most interested in is on looking at the African-American values, the American as well as the Afro-American values which are getting foregrounded over here. It in one sense celebrates the diversity, celebrate the the crux of the American dream, that anything is possible for anyone, irrespective of the background or irrespective of the ethnicity that they belong to, which historically has been proven right in the American context multiple times. Yeah, but at the same time, this play is trying to look at the race as a specific problem which needs to be understood within the context of the American society. And of course, there is also these, there are certain international elements which come in, there are these, cultural elements which come in where, race, ethnicity, culture, they all do not become homogeneous factors at all. Those are some of the things that we would talk about in detail when we are looking at the play as well. So as Lorraine Hansberry always emphasized, but some critics are wont to ignore, A Raisin in the Sun was not just a human document, a play of ideas, a political and philosophical statement. So this is where, the play becomes extremely important. It's not just about how a certain character, Walter or Lena, would have responded to a certain situation. It is more like a philosophical treatise. It is showing us a certain context, a certain situation where perhaps most characters with the same kind of social situation, the same kind of ethnicity would have ended up behaving in the same way. So that is something, which is very powerful about the works which try to foreground, say, for instance, race, caste or gender. Those are intensely private experiences, but at the same time, due to the social conditioning, due to the cultural and moral expectations which come from specific kinds of social conditioning, we find that these it's not just about individuals. It becomes something bigger than that. It's something very structural, very systemic. The critique over here is not just about the choices that one individual made. It's not just about the choices that one family made, but it is about the choices into which they are being forced into. The choices which do not operate as choices at all. So, which is why it's also seen as a political and philosophical narrative over here. So, ironically, the positive qualities of character which should lend quality to Walter's character, such as his iron will, his high expectations of himself. Here we find, very very brief but very powerful description of Walter's characters, which is again here we find unlike here we find that unlike some of those characters, the protagonists in Arthur Miller's drama, we find that here is a character who knows what he is doing. At some level, he's quite sorted, but that does not take care of that does not really save him from being from meeting his tragedy. His iron will, his high expectations of himself, his determination to succeed are those which often reduce him to the role of villain when he is compared to his mother. Hers may be a more positive image, but this is due to the fact that she must rely on and fight with Walter using the only tools available to her. Patience. You find these dichotomies over here which are gender oriented as well. Patience, understanding, selflessness and love, even though these may be indeed are genuine expressions of her character. Moreover, though it appears that she relinquishes her role as head of the household out of concern for Walter's welfare, she is no doubt quite happy to lay that burden down. Significantly, this occurs after she has taken a step toward the realization of her own dream by purchasing the house, an act which would seem to nullify Walter's dreams. So there is there is this notion of the American dream. In pursuit of that, we find there are a lot of, these micro dreams as well, the individual dreams, the family dreams. If we again go back and think about all the plays that we have done so far, we find that in each play, there is a character or a set of characters who have their own set of dreams. And some of their dreams, some characters have dreams which are in alignment with how the notion of American dream is defined. But some characters, like in Glass Menagerie, Tom, he has dreams which are not perfectly in alignment with the guarantee of success and prosperity that comes out of the larger structural notion of the American dream. However, no real enmity exists between Walter and his mother. For though opposites in their ways of looking at the world and in their responses to it, their character types united by love for each other and for their family, both seek to improve the conditions affecting their lives. Here, we can also find parallels between this family as well as the family in All My Sons. They are not making enemies within their own families. They are driven by different perspectives, driven by different sets of ideologies. Their notion of social commitment is very different, but what unites them is this love for each other. They stay committed to each other, and at that point, the love for the family, the love to save the family, the commitment towards the family becomes bigger and more magnificent than the commitment towards those abstract notions which govern the running of the country or which govern the many idealistic definitions which are out there. To look at Lena Younger's character a bit more in detail, hers is the thinking of a black woman born near the turn of the century in a racist American society. She does not understand the modern ways and thinking of her children. Something has changed, she tells Walter. You something new, boy. In my time, we was worried about not being lynched and getting to the north if we could, and how to stay alive and still have a pinch of dignity too. Now here come you and Benita talking about things we ain't never even thought about, hardly me and your daddy. You ain't satisfied or proud of nothing we done. I mean that you had a home, that we kept you out of trouble till you was grown, that you don't have to ride to work on the back of nobody's streetcar. You're my children. But how different we done become. This statement makes clear the racial conditioning which has had a profound impact on her life, just like gender. So there is a racial conditioning, there is a racial profiling, just the way it works for gender, which is very clear over here, which operates in very different ways, even within the same family across generations. So this is a positive impact that this play is also having in terms of, highlighting the possibilities which are out there. So in some sense, it is celebrating the many prospects which are out there, which have been opened up due to, say, the diversity that American dream seems to afford, it can afford to accommodate that kind of diversity. But on the other hand, it is also making it clear to us there are certain kinds of divides which cannot be entirely bridged. Yeah? Her experiences with discrimination as a young woman in the South affected her thinking. Yeah. So while they did not destroy her self-esteem, they did color her outlook on life, narrowing her perspective and restricting her beliefs about what a Black person could reasonably expect to achieve in American society. Yeah? So this promise of access, the promise of prosperity, the promise of material success, yeah, it all works differently. It's all received differently depending on your social conditioning as well. Yeah, that's something that we see in her life here. The only way a Black person could escape discrimination in the South of that time was move to the North. Yeah, so this is something, we will see in a number of other works too. Like, look at American fiction. Yeah, Faulkner, who talks about South as being this extremely regressive patriarchal system where it is not easy on, being on either side. It really does not help because it is that the racial conditioning is that deep-seated. Yeah? So here also you get the sense of this north-south divide, and this escape becomes, not just a psychological escape. One has to move from one territory to the other in order to escape this kind of a conditioning. So this movement, this is something, again, something it's very different from the other place that we have looked at. For the rest of them, the divide is more in terms of the rural-urban divide. You look at Arthur Miller's plays, we look at, Glass Menagerie. Yeah? The difference is largely in terms of the exposure and the access and the tools that you find in the rural and the urban settings. Yeah? And here, it is more about, the mindset. Yeah? It is more about the mindset which governs, predominantly governs in each of these different, North and the South settings. Though it was a compromise, the action she took meant that she was a fighter who took the step that many of her generation did in order to make a meaningful change in her life. In fact, she's still a fighter, and she proves it by buying the house to bring about the change she now feels is needed for her family's welfare. As she says, when the world gets ugly enough, a woman will do anything for her family. Her belief in this change, which is her version of the American dream, sets her at odds with her son, Walter. Yeah? So we have two different ways of looking at this play now. On the one hand, there is a certain tragedy which is inherent in these limited access to the worlds that put forward the notion of American dream. On the other hand, there is also, different versions of American dream, gendered versions, racial versions. There are very different versions of the American dream depending on your location, your gendered location, your say the rural or the urban location, yeah, the South and the North, and more importantly, the way in which one locates oneself ethnically, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of race. So this is what, fundamentally it is in the pursuit of this American dream that they differ. This is again, something that we would see in Arthur Miller's plays as well. Yeah, they all believe in the American dream, but the pursuit of it, yeah, the things that they do or do not do to reach there, that is what sets them apart, and that's what sometimes, even ends up tearing these families apart. Like her earlier move to the North, the purchase of a suburban Chicago house reflects a compromise or acceptance of less than she deserves or is entitled to. Hers is, in short, not the true American dream, but a second-class version of it, reserved for Black Americans and other poor people. So this perhaps is the greatest contribution of a play like this. While it is, critiquing, while the other plays have also been critiquing the notion of the American dream. This is a play which says that there are different versions of the American dream. Yeah, there are certain second best versions, a second class version, as it is reserved for the Black Americans, other poor people, the others, the immigrants, yeah, for the refugees. Yeah. So there are different versions of the American dream, and it's not just a monolithic thing to which everyone can subscribe to. Considering all the obstacles she has had to face as a Black woman, she can hardly fault her for what she does. Nevertheless, her dream is unacceptable to Walter, who will have nothing less than the complete American dream, since her version of it only amounts to surviving, not living in the fullest sense. So the conflict also comes over here when a character like Walter wants more than his share, quote unquote, his share. Yeah. So, Lena has in her mind a certain notion of what she can subscribe to, what she can get out of this notion of the American dream, where the boundaries are drawn, where the limitations are made more visible. But Walter refuses to accept this second class version. Walter refuses to accept these different versions. He would want to go for the best version which is made available out there. And this, in some sense, if you push this argument further, we find that it operates in various ways, not just in terms of caste. What we saw in the Zoo story, was also, there are different versions of the American dream based on your class location as well. So all of these plays, in a nutshell, what they're also trying to foreground is that there are many different versions of American dream depending on your location. There are certain things which you can easily access, there are certain things which are entirely out of bound for you, and there are certain things, maybe a toned down version, a more adulterated version of it would be given to you as well. Yeah. So with this, we will bring this discussion to an end. We will continue looking at these critical ways in which the play has been read, and also spend some time talking about the finer details about characterization, about the major themes which have been foregrounded in this play, Raisin in the Sun. So thank you for your time. I will look forward to seeing you in the next session.